Hello, everybody. This is Allison. I do apologize for being a little later than I intended to be. But today, we're going to be talking about bringing loved ones with you to hospital appointment, to doctor or hospital appointments. Here's the thing. When you're dealing with a disabling condition or pretty much any kind of severe illness, it is often really helpful to get a second opinion and have somebody look at things through clear eyes. Because honestly, when you first get anything severe, it can be really overwhelming and it can be difficult to process. Um, and the more important what the doctor has to say to you, the more likely it is that it's going to be something stressful and hard to deal with. And you'll see a lot of literature kind of says, oh, you might want to bring a loved one with you. And that's true. The challenge is really, who do you bring with you? You might have a lot of people you could ask. You might have a very limited selection of people you might be able to ask with you. And either way, sometimes it is better to go alone. And so I want to talk to you today about thinking through whether you're going to bring someone with you, and if you do, who that's going to be. The first thing I think is really important is the person you want to have with you is somebody who is on the same page as you. It's somebody who also wants you to get better, who's also concerned about your health, and who can stay reasonably calm and collected while you're trying to figure out what you're doing while you're talking to the doctor. It's really important that there's somebody who's going to compliment you and who's going to focus on you and your well-being through the whole appointment. So you as the patient should be taking the lead. You should be asking the doctor questions first. You should be able to make your requests. You really need, each time you go to the doctor, to get as much out of the appointment as you can, get good quality information, get useful details, and really, you really need to know what's going on so that you're in the best possible shape. I've had people come with me a lot of the times when I've had doctor's appointments, but I've also found times where I was actually better off not having somebody with me. When my conversion symptoms first started, which was in 2003, my father came with me to all of my appointments. I wasn't driving, and so he would drive me to the appointment and he would stay in there with me. And he was a very calm person who kind of, whatever happened, he'd just be like, okay, we can do this. And the other thing with how he behaved was he was a relatively quiet person, but his background was in engineering, and so he was really good at trying to get to the meat of things and make sure that he really understood what was going on. So if at an appointment something wasn't clear, even if I didn't ask for clarification, he might. So we made sure together that I was getting all the right questions answered and I was getting the best possible treatment. My father actually died with less than a year after I got injured. And my mother wanted to come in and come with me to my appointments. And I love my mother. This is not any kind of thing on her, but we have very similar personalities, and she's a very anxious person. And so I found that when she accompanied me to an appointment, she unintentionally made herself the center of what was happening. She was there to accompany me, but I ended up spending a lot of energy comforting her that I was going to be okay at the appointment and what the doctor had to say would be manageable and things like that. And so while I really, really appreciated her willingness to come with me and her desire to help me, I did figure out that having her with me was not always the most helpful. And so I had to kind of take stock and figure out what to do and how to manage it. And what I ended up doing was each appointment I had gotten my diagnosis while my father was alive. I have functional neurological disorder. At that time, it was referred to as conversion disorder. I had already established my neurologist, and he was wonderful. I really, he was amazingly helpful, honestly. He was a specialist in movement disorders, and he really, really knew his stuff. And I was very comfortable with him. And so I didn't feel like I needed anybody to come with me to my appointments with him. If anything, if somebody came with me, it was so they could meet him and see how well he understood my condition. So I went to those appointments alone. He was up in New York City, and I live a fair bit outside, but it's still commutable by train. And so that's what I do. I go in by myself and see him. And a big part of that was that I trusted him and felt very comfortable with him. I also did have a firm diagnosis at that point, so I wasn't going to get super shocking news. The big concern after my diagnosis were two things, and one was whether or not I would get control of my body back and how that would work. And the other part was actually that the way FND, conversion disorder, works, people actually get doctors who go, oh yeah, that's an FND symptom, that's an FND symptom, oh, that's an FND symptom too. And sometimes they're wrong. And if they're wrong, then you've got a different condition going on too. It doesn't mean the conversion diagnosis is wrong, but you got something going on too, and that might be treatable or manageable. And again, with almost any disease, catching it early is one of the best ways to cure yourself more quickly and heal better and all of those wonderful things. So my conversations with him, I was very comfortable going in alone. When I was meeting doctors for the first time, when I was anxious about the appointment, during that period of time, I would look to have other people accompany me. I did have a boyfriend at the time who was pretty supportive, but he was working full time. So occasionally he'd come with me if I thought it was a really important appointment, and he'd take a day or part of the day off work to accompany me. But most of the time I actually went alone. The partner I have now is another person who's really good to come with me. He's also very calm, and I'm at this point very comfortable with my appointment, so I'm not too worried anyway. But he listens. He's not visibly upset or stressed, so nobody feels like they need to comfort him. I'm the focus of the appointment, which is as it should be. And, he does ask a question or two sometimes. And he's actually incredibly helpful for me when they're asking to describe things, to how I manage things and what's happening and what do my symptoms look like and various things like that, because he lives with me. And so he's seen everything firsthand. And sometimes he notices something that I started doing recently or I started experiencing recently that he can then share with them. That's part of what having somebody with you can be really good for. If they can observe you, and so a very close friend, a family member who lives with you, your partner, people like that are empathetic and aware are extremely useful. And it's more important, I think, to have somebody empathetic, calm, and aware than to have the person who lives with you if you're in a living situation where that person is probably going to either distract from your appointment or distract you during the appointment. And this isn't necessarily a knock on them. It's not necessarily that they're a bad person. It's just they're not the right person to come with you to your appointment. The other thing is, if you're feeling insecure yourself, or feel kind of overwhelmed, you might want to have somebody come with you who either is experienced in being a patient and isn't going to be made anxious by it, or somebody who you can trust to be assertive if they need to be. Again, you don't want it to be someone who takes the attention away from you, because you are the patient and you need to be the center of the doctor's attention if at all possible. But if you're going to get in there and you're not going to be able to say anything, or you're not going to be able to stop them if they try to leave and remind them you need a plan, well, then bring somebody who's going to make sure that happens. If you know you're anxious about being in that medical space, if you're not used to it, if you're uncomfortable with it, think about if you've got a good friend or family member who has more experience with you or handles new situations better. The key thing is, anytime you're going to a doctor's appointment, it's more important that you feel comfortable and are able to get your questions asked than that you have somebody with you or that you don't have somebody with you. You need to be comfortable. You need to feel reasonably safe. You need to make sure your questions, you can ask questions and you can get answers. And if that's you by yourself because other family members or friends or loved ones are going to either distract the doctor or distract you, you just don't want to bring them. Right now, my partner is going through his own more resolved now, but not completely. And I was a huge advocate for him medically through his whole thing. He broke his hip, which shouldn't have happened. And eventually, the doctor finally got around to remembering, oh yeah, we were talking about testing his, I reminded him actually that we were going to test his bone density, because it was really weird, the kind of break that he had. It was called an acetabular fracture, where he'd actually broken the joint of the hip instead of the femur, the bone going into the joint. And most of the times when somebody breaks their hip, part of the femur broke. It's a ball and socket joint. So part of the ball part broke. And, you do need to go in and replace the femur. But in Al's case, it was the socket that broke. And so you can't do hip replacement surgery because there's nothing to attach the replacement to. And so they had to go in and reconstruct his hip, which is a much more intense and complicated process. He had to wait for 10 weeks after that to put any weight down on his injured side, things like that. So at first we were very, very focused on his, initial recovery. Then when we did go in, talked, when he was able to walk again, I basically pointed out to his surgeon that, wasn't it weird that he broke the bones, and can't we check his bone density? And so we did. And we found out that he had osteoporosis. Again, weird. Not something to expect in a younger man. And so we looked into it, and we went through multiple doctors, and throughout everything, I called and made the appointments. I set things up. And the big thing I did at each appointment was I asked the doctors, okay, so what's next? What do you know? When do we see you again? Do you think we've got the problem figured out or explained? And if not, what's our next step? And by doing that, we have found out that a couple of doctors just weren't worth seeing because they weren't, they couldn't figure things out, and they gave excuses. Another talk I'll have to do is about the different ways that doctors say, I don't know, without saying, I don't know, because there's a lot of them, and sometimes they're tricky, and it is really important. But for this, the important thing is having somebody with you who will Also listen, so you've got a second set of ears hearing what's happening, somebody else who's taking notes if you need at the appointment, just to help make sure that the message is coming across and you know what the step is and what you need to do next, so that you can do whatever that is. And that might be make an appointment, that might be take some, have some tests. There's a lot of things it might be. But the worst thing is to leave the appointment and then go, okay, so now what? And really, honestly, don't be sure. And some doctors are not good at expressing what you need to do next before you go in, before you leave. So again, when you're going into a doctor's appointment, it's really, really important that you can ask them the questions and get your answers. And if that means bringing somebody with you, think carefully about who you might bring. Also, I want to say that there are some appointments you really don't need somebody else with. If you're assigned to physical therapy, it makes total sense for a support person to come into that first appointment to make sure that the physical therapist has a full picture of what's going on and what needs to happen. And they might give you some advice on supporting your loved one. They might give your loved one some advice on how to be supportive or what to expect. It's important to know if you need to remind them, no, really, you have to be climbing the stairs, or that there's a step that they need to do at home, and you can remind them of that. But don't need someone to come with you for every single physical therapy appointment, unless you need a ride, and then they don't have to come in. They can drop you off and run some errands and then pick you up, or they can drop you off. They can go in with you and, play a game or read a book or something. But you don't need to have them come in for every single one. The important time to bring somebody in with you is when you're really trying to get the next step in your diagnosis, and when you need to hear test results, because some test results can be very frightening. And it might be the doctor gives you the news and you're just not going to hear anything for a little bit because you're still wrapping your brain around the news. But that makes it even more important to know your next steps. I can tell you my major stuff was the FND diagnosis. But also since then, I've had to deal with cervical issues, and it's been really powerful for me to have my partner with me. When we found out we found precancerous cells, I'm lucky because it didn't have to go any further than that. It was a biopsy, and so far I'm fine. But having him with me when I got those results was very helpful. And having him, be by my side and supportive, and then letting me take the lead in the questions. But if he felt like I missed something, asking something, that's huge. It really is. Both the moral support aspect of it and the extra set of ears. So again, any appointment that might be very significant or is going to be significant, that's the ones you want to bring someone with. If it's just part of a process or another step along the way, you might not need somebody in there with you. And again, it is better to go in alone than it is to go in with somebody who's going to keep you from absorbing the information, either by distracting you, like if you're with somebody who needs that you need to provide a lot of support to, emotional or physical, you might not be the person to go with you, especially if it's you actively thinking about them. If they can manage their stuff, that's different. That's fine. But you want your attention 100% on the conversation with your doctor, and you want the person who's with you to be supportive, to listen carefully, to take notes or write things down, write down what needs to be written down, make sure they've got the name of the diagnosis right, spelling, those kinds of things. And then afterwards, to help you process it. So I just want to say thank you everyone for listening. And it is really important to note if you need someone with you, and if you do, to make sure that they're the right person. Again, that could be partner, could be parent, could be friend, could be child if you have older children. Whether you're an adult with adult children, or you've got a mature teenager or something that can really be helpful. But the important thing is know yourself on this and make the choice that makes the most sense for you. And if you need support, ask for it. You might be surprised how many people are willing to. And just think about who to ask and when to ask them. Advance warning is useful, and communicating clearly what you need is very helpful. Anyway, if you want to read, I have a post on this. I've got a post on a lot of related topics. Just take a look at thrivingwelldisabled.com, which is my website. And thank you so much for listening. All right. Have a nice day.